Ashwin Desai, a Professor of Sociology at the University of Johannesburg, and Ashwell Adriaan, a former rugby player and administrator, have collaborated on a new book about rugby titled Line Breakers, the Rugby-Playing Sons of Makana and Stuurman. The book aims to lift the veil on some of the unwritten stories behind Black Rugby in South Africa. And to discuss this further, I'm joined by Zoom, by the book's authors, Professor Ashwin Desai, and we also hope to be joined by Ashwell Adriaan in just a moment. But Professor, I'm going to start with you. A very good morning to you. Thank you so much for joining us. Welcome to Morning Live.
Great to be with you, brother.
Let's start with what brought about this collaboration between you and Ashwell to write this book together.
We met each other in 1980, and I had come to Rhodes University to be a student. He lived in Grahamstown at the time, and we just remained friends, and we had a deep passion for sport. I played soccer, he played rugby, and sometime in 2006 he said, "Ashwin, we've got to write the history of Black Rugby." And I thought, how do you tell the story? How do you write a story where there are no records, where there are no photographs, where there are no archives, where there are no videos? And only to find that, people kept photographs from 1900, that the first Black Rugby club in Makana, Winter Rose, was formed in 1887. And it just made me think about how can we talk about decolonizing the curriculum, decolonizing the archive, that the history of rugby is the history of white rugby when we're sitting with this history. And this history needs to be told. And so it began a collaboration over 14 years. And so the book comes to be. And it's, the way it's received by the people in the book who played the game, whose fathers and grandfathers were part of these rugby clubs, has just been incredible.
I mean, 14 years later, Line Breakers is out. Speak to us a bit more about this book and what you two had wanted to achieve with it.
Firstly, we all watch rugby, we listen to the commentary, and let's take an example like Siya Kolisi. Siya Kolisi is seen as a product post-1994 of the demise of apartheid, the building of unified rugby structures. But actually, what we wanted to show that the Kolisis have been playing rugby for over 120 years. In fact, one of the oldest clubs in Grahamstown, Wanderers, you'll see a Kolisi was there in the early 1900s. In 1937, a Kolisi kicked a penalty for Eastern Province against the then Transvaal. And one of the greatest players in Makanda was Vuyani Kolisi, who captained the provincial team. We have a photograph of him wearing the number 6 jersey. And so this idea that, somehow Siya Kolisi is a product of post-1994 is just rubbish, that there's a spine of rugby-playing Kolisis. And so that's one of the things to achieve in this book. The second thing comes from the title. Yes. Two things. The book is called Line Breakers, and it has the words Stuurman and Makana. And it's just incredible that when you talk to people, why Stuurman and Makana? Because both in the area of Makanda, they united to fight in the 100-year war against the dispossession of colonial dispossession. They both end up on Robben Island. They both try to escape, and Makana drowns and Stuurman escapes and is finally transported to Australia and dies there. So these are the sons of Makana and Stuurman who are playing the colonial game, but they're playing it in ways that want to break the line. They want to play it in ways that unite across racial lines and play liberation sport. Yes. Rather than sport that reinforces the colonial and apartheid regimes. So from the title of the book, through the photographs, this is a book of a recovery of history through these photographs.
And you mentioned Siya Kolisi and as well as the other Kolisis, and the book pays homage to the generosity of legends like Phumzile Adam and Marcus Solomon. Tell us more about this as well as other stories that you share in this book.
Well, just the incredible way, we always talk about these, grassroots intellectuals, but the way Phumzile Adam is able to think through what they were trying to do in the 70s. Here was a colored the rugby union, and here was an African rugby union, and it played into the hands of the white apartheid regime to have these two unions as separated. And people like Pumzile Adam, George Lamani, they wanted to break these unions and produce a non-racial union, which became SEDRU. So these were deliberate acts. What we have, this anti-racism in the belly of apartheid is not just comes from the top or through God. These are built by real people thinking through not only their sport, but their politics. So that's, one of the things to achieve. The other thing to achieve is to tell these incredible personal stories. One of the stories we tell is of Lexing Party. Lexing Party was a waiter. He then goes to work for a furniture company, but he plays for OC, Old Collegians, and ends up being the deputy head of the Supreme Courts of Appeals. So these are incredible stories of sacrifice and redemption that one wants to bring to the fore, because we think we know our histories. It's only when we go back in time. And for example, there's a photograph in 1900. And just think about 1900. Just think it was when Boer and Brit were at war, the dislocation in the Eastern Cape, that great warriors in the 100-Year War were forced to work as miners, as migrant laborers. But their link they kept back to Makana was through rugby. They always came back to play for their clubs. They always held Winter Rose and Lily White and in their hearts. And this was what gave a sense of dignity, a sense that you could prevail against the most incredible odds and the worst form of oppression, the migrant labor system, which took you away from your families, from your hometowns, and forced you underground. So that's the kind of spine, that's the kind of storyline, that's the narrative we want to bring to bear, because the present is about the past. The present is about how you build the future. What lessons do we learn of this great anti-apartheid movement in rugby that can pronounce itself in the present?
Interesting reflections there, Professor. And I understand that you both had a bit of a struggle to find a way to sort of stitch fragments into a narrative. Now, take us through the journey of working on this book together. How was it like?
Yes, and this is one of the things. We all want to write stories. We want to tell these histories. But in the absence of records, and gaps in the years, how do you tell it? I know, somebody was telling me, what about the Guguletu Rugby Association? How do we tell the story? Everywhere these stories. But then we come across a man, Fana Manana. I mean, this man, he was a super spreader of rugby. He comes out of the then Grahamstown. He goes to East London, he goes to Cape Town, he goes to Johannesburg, and he's building rugby teams, he's joining rugby teams. So we pick up Manana's story in the early 1900s. We follow him through these provinces. His son then plays for Eastern Province, China Manana. And then, who becomes the third black springbuck, Patando Manana. Just think about how you then can able to write a narrative, how you can link the past with the present, how you can link the demise of colonialism that links into apartheid, but then the end of apartheid and the ability to wear a springbuck blazer. And so to link these things by taking cognizance, not a syrupy history, but taking cognizance of the incredible struggles that people face to keep this game alive. But the imaginations, black people play rugby differently because of nutrition, because of apartheid. They play rugby, running rugby, because a black lock will be smaller than even a white center. And so they play running rugby. One of the teams referred to themselves as Amaplanka because they were fragile. They could break like planks, so they zipped the ball. And so lots of thought was not only going into the game, but how the game could be used to change society.
And recently, Black Rugby, I'm actually glad that you raised that point, because recently Black Rugby has been put under the spotlight with reports of racism and discrimination in your sport, in this sport. So what's your take on this?
Well, this is the thing. Firstly, racism, comes in different guises, in different ways. For example, it was always said, the Afrikaner concept of of rugby was to have the bigger you are, the better you were. So when somebody like Brayton Paulser comes along, they don't want to play him because they think he's too small. And in fact, when Cheslin Colby, who's a genius, who's world class, it was said, no, this guy should be a scrum half. He can't be a wing. And, anybody watching the game against the Lions, seeing the sidestep, seeing him push off a big Lions forward and make for the Lion would say how stupid this is. So sometimes in our consciousness, the way we think about the game, it can be incredibly racist. And this comes to the fore across the board. And so how do we deal with this racism? How do we confront the re-racialization of our society? And that is why in the book, we do say how Siya Kolisi comes across. Well, what does he mean? He doesn't mean something just as a person. He means something about the possibility of something more in South Africa, something bigger, something grander, a vision that was in the 70s. One of the greatest books ever written on sport is by C.L.R. James, Beyond a Boundary. And the first black captain in a test series, Worrell, went to Australia, and C.R.R. James was worried he would fail or he wouldn't do good enough. But he said it was beyond that. What Worrell showed was that there was a West Indian personality that was bigger, that could leave a larger imprint. Because remember, the West Indies were separate islands and it was a federated system. Okay. But he could draw that all into his one body. And that's what we need to think about. That is why Siya is not just the player. He becomes a metaphor. He becomes a hope. He becomes a dream that it is possible for us to build the kind of anti-racist culture in rugby that can influence beyond the try line.
Professor, we're out of time, unfortunately, and we certainly hope that this book will start so many conversations around, around sport in general and around racism in some of these sports. We do appreciate your time, Prof.
Thank you so much.